Welcome to RP Revenge.
The smell of jasmine and betrayal hit her at the same time. Elena froze in the doorway, her bare feet sinking into the Persian rug she'd chosen herself. Soft, hand-woven, a wedding gift from her grandmother's estate. The air was thick with warmth and the faint hum of the ceiling fan, a rhythm she'd always found comforting. Tonight, it sounded like a taunt. She'd come home early. That was her first mistake. The second was believing the man who told her he loved her more than anything in the world would never betray her. At first, she thought she'd misheard the laughter. It floated down the hallway, light, breathy, intimate. She told herself it was the TV. Maybe a movie. But then came the whisper, delicate and venomous. "Not like Elena," a woman said, between shallow breaths. "She's so serious all the time." And Ryan's voice, low, familiar, threaded with a tenderness that once belonged to her alone, answered, "She doesn't have to know." Something broke inside her. A clean, silent crack that split straight through her chest. Elena didn't storm in. Didn't scream. Didn't throw the vase sitting beside her on the hallway console, though her hand twitched toward it. Instead, she stood there, every heartbeat echoing in her ears, every nerve raw. She had spent years perfecting composure. Law school had taught her restraint. Loss had taught her silence. But betrayal, this kind of betrayal, taught her something else entirely. How to still the body while the mind begins to sharpen. Her phone buzzed in her palm, a message from her paralegal, reminding her about the estate paperwork due tomorrow. 18 months ago, she had quietly placed her grandparents' $3 million estate into a trust. A move Ryan had praised, calling it smart, mature, responsible. He'd told her he was proud of her. He'd kissed her forehead that night as if she were made of gold. Now, he was in their bed with someone else. Elena turned away from the door and walked down the hall, barefoot, deliberate, silent. The jasmine candle she'd lit for him an hour ago still flickered in the corner of her vision, perfuming the air with a sweetness that made her stomach twist. The next morning, the house looked almost normal. Ryan made coffee in his robe, humming. He smiled at her like nothing had happened, like she hadn't heard the woman slip out the back door before dawn. His easy confidence made her skin crawl. "Morning, beautiful," he said, pouring her a cup. "You were asleep early last night. Everything okay?" Elena met his gaze over the rim of her mug. His eyes were steady, ocean blue, the same eyes that had once made her believe she was safe. Now they looked like a mask. "Fine," she said, voice calm. "Just tired." He kissed her cheek. The touch felt foreign, intrusive. She wanted to wipe it off. He went on about his meeting, his emails, his investors, the same rehearsed chatter he used to fill silence. She nodded, murmured agreement, even smiled once. She was studying him now, not listening. Every detail mattered. His tone, his gestures, the way he avoided her eyes when he mentioned staying late again. When he finally left, the door clicking shut behind him, she sat at the kitchen table and stared into her coffee until it went cold. Her pulse still beat in her throat. Not from grief, from thought. She opened her laptop and pulled up the trust documents. The estate, the vineyards, the house in Carmel, the lake cabin, all in her name, protected, insulated. Ryan's name was nowhere. She had insisted on that. Her grandmother had warned her before she passed, "Never let love sign your name for you." For the first time, Elena understood what that meant. Days passed in a strange rhythm, outward calm, inward chaos. Ryan acted the same, but something had shifted. His texts came late, his excuses thinner. He had grown careless. Elena played along. She smiled, cooked dinner, even sent him good luck messages before business trips. Meanwhile, she began to dig. A second phone. A new email address. Late nights scrolling through financial statements and private messages. It wasn't long before she found her confirmation. Hotel invoices, romantic dinners billed to his corporate card, wire transfers to an account under a woman's name she didn't recognize. Lydia. A realtor. 27. Recently divorced. Pretty, in a predictable way. There were photos too, a shared weekend in Napa, her in his hoodie, smiling against his chest. He had taken her to the same vineyard where he once told Elena he wanted to get married. That was the moment something inside Elena crystallized. On Friday, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, watching her reflection as she brushed her hair. Her face looked the same, calm, poised, but her eyes were different now. There was steel beneath the surface. Ryan came in behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Dinner tonight," he murmured against her neck. "Can't," she said lightly. "Client meeting." He kissed her shoulder. "Tomorrow then." "Sure," she smiled, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Tomorrow." He didn't notice how her smile didn't reach her eyes. That night, Elena drove to her grandmother's old study, the one room of the estate that still smelled faintly of cedar and rosewater. The walls were lined with ledgers, family records, and letters written in looping cursive. She placed a single folder on the desk, Ryan Cole, Financial Review. Inside, she began gathering every trace of him she could find. Bank records, emails, messages, copies of trust documents. She wasn't impulsive. Every step was quiet, precise. Her plan wasn't revenge in the loud, cinematic sense. It wasn't about shouting or destruction. It was about erasure. He had built a life with her name woven through it. Joint accounts, shared investments, property he believed he controlled through her. But what he didn't know was that every asset he thought was theirs was, by design, hers alone. And soon, he wouldn't even have that illusion. On Sunday morning, she drove to the lake cabin, one of the properties under the trust. The fog hung low, curling around the treetops, and the air smelled of pine and cold water. It was quiet here, isolated. She stood on the deck overlooking the lake and took a deep breath. For the first time since that night, she let herself feel. The ache came slow, then all at once, love curdled into disgust, sorrow twisting into something colder. She remembered the first time Ryan told her he loved her, his hand trembling slightly as he spoke, his sincerity so clear it had moved her to tears. She'd believed him then, wholly. And maybe he had meant it. But love, she realized, wasn't what defined people. Choice did. And Ryan had chosen deceit. Elena looked out over the water, her reflection rippling with the wind. She wasn't sure when she stopped crying, maybe halfway through the thought of what she was about to do next. When she left the cabin, her mind was clear. That night, Ryan came home to a candlelit dinner. His favorite, seared salmon, lemon risotto, white wine breathing on the counter. He grinned, disarmed. "Well, this is a surprise," he said, kissing her cheek. She smiled, slow and measured. "Thought we could use a night in." They ate. They laughed. He told her stories about work. She asked about Lydia. Not by name, not yet, but by breadcrumb. Subtle, probing questions about his day, his clients, his meetings. Watching him lie with ease was like watching a magician reveal a trick she already knew. By the time dessert was done, she had her confirmation, not that she needed it. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing the faraway look in her eyes. Elena smiled. "Perfect," she said softly. "Everything's exactly how it should be." He reached for her hand, and she let him. But in her mind, the pieces were already moving. Signatures, account transfers, legal maneuvers he'd never see coming. She would take everything he thought he owned. Everything he thought she would never touch. And when she was done, he would have nothing left, not even the comfort of knowing why. The following weeks moved like a slow current, calm on the surface, lethal beneath. Ryan was busier than ever, or so he said. Late nights at the office. Networking events. Business trips that conveniently lined up with Lydia's social media posts. Sunsets from the same resorts, champagne flutes in the same reflections. Elena didn't need to confront him anymore. She had data. And data, unlike love, didn't lie. By day, she carried on as though nothing had changed. She met clients, attended charity galas, smiled for photos beside him. She played her role so flawlessly that even he started believing everything was fine again. He never noticed the subtle shifts, the new bank accounts, the quiet power of her attorney's signatures, the withdrawal of his access to joint assets that had never been joint at all. At night, she sat at her grandmother's old mahogany desk and planned. Every click of the pen, every stroke of her signature, was a nail in the coffin of his illusion. The first strike came quietly. Ryan's brokerage account froze one Thursday morning, a technical error, the bank claimed. He cursed over breakfast, slamming his phone onto the counter. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I can't even transfer my own damn money." Elena looked up from her tea, perfectly serene. "That's strange," she said. "Maybe you should call your advisor." "I did," he snapped. "They said the authorization was revoked. Who even has the power to?" He stopped mid-sentence, blinking, then forced a laugh. "Whatever. I'll figure it out." Elena smiled faintly and went back to stirring her tea. That afternoon, she called the trust administrator to confirm the next step, transferring all jointly held investments into her private entity, something she'd prepared for months before she ever found out about Lydia. It wasn't vindictive. It was precautionary, she told herself. But deep down, she knew better. Weeks later, the market dipped sharply, wiping out one of Ryan's key holdings. He panicked, trying to liquidate what was left, only to discover the accounts had been reassigned under a trust he no longer had clearance to access. He called her that night, voice sharp, strained. "Elena, did you touch the trust?" She was sitting on the veranda, a glass of wine in hand, moonlight brushing the edge of her dress. "Touch it," she repeated lightly. "It's my family's estate, Ryan. Why would you ask that?" He exhaled harshly. "Because everything's locked up. My accounts are getting flagged. Someone's protecting what's theirs," she finished quietly. He went still. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said, swirling the wine, "that maybe you shouldn't have mixed business with pleasure." A silence stretched between them, taut, electric. She could almost hear the realization dawning on him. "Elena," he said slowly, voice darkening. "What did you do?" She smiled into the glass. "Nothing you didn't start." The confrontation came 3 days later. He stormed into the house, wild-eyed, demanding answers. "You transferred everything, didn't you? You had the documents drawn up months ago, the accounts, the properties, even the vineyard. Christ, were you planning this the whole time?" She didn't flinch. "Not the whole time," she said softly. "Just since I realized who you really were." His laugh was hollow. "You can't do this. I built this life with you." "No," she said, standing. "You built a lie around me. I just removed your name from the paperwork. You can't be serious." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You think I didn't know about Lydia? About the wire transfers? The hotel suites?" He froze, guilt flashing, then anger, then something close to fear. "You went through my accounts. You left them open," she said. "You always underestimated me. You thought I was too soft, too loyal to look beneath the surface. But you forget, I was raised by a woman who built an empire from nothing. You taught me how to be ruthless. I just learned faster than you expected." He clenched his fists. "You'll regret this, Elena." "Maybe," she said calmly. "But not as much as you will." He moved out that night, slamming doors, shouting about lawyers and justice. She didn't follow. She stood at the window, watching the taillights vanish into the fog. The silence that followed was deep, clean, like air after a storm. For the first time in months, she slept soundly. The legal letters began arriving 2 weeks later. His lawyers demanded restitution, ownership claims, evidence of coercion. She read every one, then handed them to her counsel, who filed polite, devastating responses. By the time the court hearings began, Ryan was already drowning in debt. His company, financed in part through her capital, was collapsing. The creditors came next. One by one, his safety nets vanished, the way a shoreline disappears beneath the tide. Through it all, Elena remained composed. She never once raised her voice, never gloated. When friends asked why they'd split, she said simply, different values. But at night, when the wind rustled through the olive trees outside her window, she'd think of the way he'd once looked at her, as if she were something precious. And she'd wonder, not without bitterness, whether he'd ever really loved her at all. Months later, she ran into Lydia by chance, at a charity gala downtown. The younger woman approached hesitantly, clutching a champagne flute, eyes darting toward Elena's diamond bracelet. "I didn't know he was still married," she blurted. "He told me you were separated." Elena smiled, cool and elegant. "He told me many things." Lydia looked stricken. "I'm sorry. I didn't." "Don't be," Elena said. "You did me a favor." And with that, she turned and walked away, the click of her heels echoing like punctuation. By summer, Ryan's name had faded from headlines and contracts alike. He sold his car, then his condo. Eventually, even Lydia left him. The last Elena heard, he'd moved to another state, starting fresh. She didn't follow his story after that. Instead, she poured her focus into restoring her grandparents' vineyard, the same one where he had once promised her forever. She rebuilt the terraces, reopened the tasting room, and renamed the estate, Villa Seraphine. It meant burning one. When the first harvest came, she hosted a private dinner on the terrace overlooking the valley. The sky was streaked with gold and rose. The air smelled of earth and new beginnings. She raised her glass, not to victory, but to clarity. Because revenge, she realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about reclamation. She had taken back everything he'd stolen. Her peace, her dignity, her story. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. She hesitated before opening it, tracing the familiar loops of his name. Inside, one line stood out among the rambling apologies and excuses. "I hope someday you forgive me. You always had a talent for making people believe you cared." Elena read it twice, then folded it neatly and slipped it into the fireplace. The paper curled and blackened, the ink dissolving into smoke. She watched it burn, her reflection flickering in the glass pane, calm, untouchable. 18 months ago, she had placed her grandparents' $3 million estate into a trust, just to be safe. She hadn't known then what she was protecting herself from, not just financial ruin, but emotional devastation. Now, she finally understood. The trust hadn't been for the estate. It had been for her.